Have you ever felt like the odd one out at work happy hours or team celebrations because you don't drink? On today's episode of Sober Life Rocks, we're going to dive into the reality of how workplace camaraderie often revolves around alcohol, the challenges that this creates for non-drinkers, and how we can foster a more inclusive and meaningful connections in professional settings. Join us for a raw conversation that will open your eyes to the consequences of breaking cultural norms.
Welcome to the Sober Life Rocks podcast. You may have made the decision not to drink alcohol, or at the very least, not at work-related events. Whether you've never been a drinker, are in recovery, or made a health-related decision, we see you, and you are not alone. In today's world, networking, socializing, and celebrations often happen over drinks, and the struggle can be real. Through this podcast, we're changing that narrative. We're here to create a community where individuals like you, who choose not to drink or drink less, can find camaraderie, support, and practical advice.
Steve Knapp is the host of Through the Glass Recovery podcast. He believes that connection is the opposite of addiction, that vulnerability is the antidote to shame, and that recovery isn't just rewarding, it's also a lot of fun.
You bet. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I love about this podcast is I feel like the chance to hear other people's stories is like a pathway out of isolation. It's feeling like, you know, we're not the only one who has walked the same road and come out stronger and better.
Right.
So I would love it if you would just like share with us your story because it's really, really powerful.
All right. Well, very much like our own podcast, we like it's all about hearing what other people's experiences are and sharing on what it was like for them, because as you know, that feeling of loneliness can linger on without even recognizing it. And I think that's where I'm gonna lead into that, is that feeling alone and not being able to recognize that that's my feeling. And instead, I'm working to try and be included.
Yep.
And I think like you either experience one and you feel one, or you experience the other and you feel the other. So like I'm trying to be included, uh, especially starting, my drinking really didn't start until I was in college, and it was late in college because I still really didn't drink there. And so I drank later on in life because I had childhood epilepsy and I was just afraid of what was going to happen
Mm.
until I started working. And then when I started working at an industrial facility. We made high fructose corn syrup uh, from corn. So lots of pumps, pipes, valves. It was a big plant. And I started out as an operator, a guy on the floor, moving the equipment, helping fix it, doing all the things. And we work shift work. So you kind of, when you're working night shift and things like that, you get involved with your crew, and those people have the same days off as you, and you go out, you plan your days off, and you go out golfing, and drinking is involved, and you go out to a buddy's house at a party, and it's just drinking. And I mean, I'm in my early 20s.
Yeah,
That's like a
it's fun.
thing. It's fun. It's a thing that
Yeah.
happens. I'm feeling included. Uh, I'm I'm doing a little bit of crazy things because when I drank, I got uh, it was definitely liquid courage for me. And so I did liquid couragey things. And I thought it made me fun, and people liked having me around, and that was great. It was
It's a great bonding.
Yeah, and it was because that's what you did. Like you brought a case of beer with you. I would, even outside of work, I would plan events. Eventually, as I got older, I would plan events, and they were like drinking events that where we went and did something else,
Yeah.
right? And so, but even at the workplace, like we had a hockey tournament, and this was one of my like green light moments, I call them in in my drinking. We were at a hockey tournament, and I've never had a drink in a vehicle. Up to that point in time. And we're all in a big van, and it's like a big rented van, and we're on our way, and there's a bunch of coolers, and the one guy opens up, cracks the cooler. We're on the road, we're hitting the highway, and it's, hey, do you want a beer? You're sitting in the back seat of a van, you're not driving,
Sure.
everyone else is having one. Sure, why not? I didn't know we could do this. This is kind of cool. Like, it feels wrong, but everyone else is doing it, so it must make it right.
Hmm.
So that was the first time I had a drink in a vehicle, and that meant then it was okay for me to drink in a vehicle while I wasn't driving, right? That's like a major shift. So road trips, I'd have drinks in the back seat and things like that. And eventually that led to my own drinking and driving.
Mm.
Drinking and driving became drinking in my vehicle actually became my quote unquote safe space.
Your
There's
bar.
no one to bug me, right?
Yeah.
It was the easiest way I could continue on. But anyways, you'd have work events where uh you'd the company would take everyone out like bowling or something like that. And you'd go, and you you drank. That's what you do. Like the beer would show up at the table, and you would
Hmm.
drink and bowl, and you're
And have a
supposed
good
to be
time.
you're supposed to it's weird how the culture is alcohol equals bonding,
Yeah.
right? Like, for some reason, that is the culture where alcohol makes you lesser than everybody else, kind of lesser than, and yet it's like this one socially acceptable thing that if you don't do it, you're the weird one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, uh,
So
time
fast
went
forward me
on.
to then what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, time went on. I got promoted. I went from operator. I did great. Just over 9 years. I worked my butt off. Um, and I got promoted to being supervisor of all of the guys. So everything changed for me.
Mm.
So my work schedule changed. I no longer had the friends that I had anymore, just because of position change. It was one of those things that I was super afraid of. And that my drinking went up there, but then we had corporate events and stuff like that, right? So it wasn't too long after I became a supervisor, I became what was called refinery lead, basically in charge of half the operation of the facility. And then, so I would go to these yearly events that were at different plants, hosted by different plants. And every night we'd go out to a restaurant, and like one of the features is the local booze.
Hmm.
And I
Bonding over
was
the drinks. Yeah.
really good at trying them all, right? And I
Sure. Why
mean,
not?
you had the connoisseurs, and you had the people, but you would dine, and it would be something that would flow. And I can remember waking up hungover, and it was just so culturally accepted. And my own problem, not work problem, because they're not forcing it down my throat, right? But once again, it's just the culture of you, the higher up you go, the greater it seemed that culture perpetrated,
Hmm.
right? Like, it
Hmm.
was just what you did is how you celebrated, and how you bonded, and how you did the things. Unless it was um a company lunch that was on site,
Right.
then there was no booze involved, because you can't have booze on site. You can't have that on site, which is great. But then you would go out for a company lunch, and I'd always check to see if like my boss had a drink, and if he did, then I did, because then it became acceptable again. And
Yeah.
so eventually my drinking got so bad, the pressure of my job and my own personal issues, of course, but my drinking got so bad that it was really affecting how I was operating in the workplace.
Mm.
And so I it came to a point where I decided that I was going to quit. And like we spoke about before, when I quit very publicly
Mm.
to the people that were really important in my life. And that included my workplace. I didn't know what the consequences of that were going to be, but I thought, okay, if I'm quitting because for me, when I quit, the lie got too big to carry. The weight of the
Yeah.
lie was too much to carry now that I had to do something different. So the next day, and it was a Sunday when I quit, so it was a Monday morning, and I was in no shape to go to work. I called up HR and I told HR I had a problem with alcohol and I was going to do something about it.
Well, good for you. How did they respond?
Um, okay. That's pretty much how that started out. Okay, like I'm glad you're going to work on that. There wasn't much conversation. I became an enigma after that.
So they
Uh,
didn't offer you resources or
they
support or
they did afterwards.
Mm.
After it started affecting my job performance. I knew we had resources there, and HR let me know, like we have the EAP program and stuff like that. I had used the EAP program prior to that. I had made an appointment with a counselor and done that. The EAP program only gives you 3 meetings with a counselor and then the program is done.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't ready to quit at that time. I didn't tell her that I had a problem. That's a whole different story. But I did learn that if you go and use the EAP program, it's only good for 3 sessions. Here are your tools, right?
Mhm.
Go and use them. Uh, Being this far in recovery now, I'm almost 4 years sober. I'll be 4 years sober in March. Uh,
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. Like I've been thinking about that recently, and that feels like a really long time now.
Is
And I'm like 3 years. It feels different than 3 years did.
it
But
is. Okay, so HR sort of blinks
yeah,
at you and says, "Okay." And
yeah,
then what happened?
and I mean, I show up to work the next day. I called my parents. I told them I have a problem with alcohol, and this is what I said to work too. I have a problem with alcohol. I'm gonna quit. I need help. I'm gonna get some help, sorry. I need your support, but I don't know what that's gonna look like because I had no idea.
Mhm.
But I knew that I wasn't gonna be able to do it without people around me. And this was before I
Mm.
investigated any sort of form of recovery, is just how I innately was going about that morning. Uh, so I went to work the next day, and when I went to work the next day, like I even told my boss knew. It was we didn't have a conversation, we didn't talk about it, we didn't it was just like business as normal, which is
Okay.
I
Appropriate.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah.
expect too much more from that, except for nothing else changes. Now, uh, because I'm now out as an alcoholic, I have problems with alcohol. N Nobody has a hard conversation with me anymore. Hard conversations now show up with, here are resources for you as you're having a problem at work.
Mm.
So my addiction now becomes, which I'm not addicted anymore. Like I'm beyond that. I'm in my recovery, and it becomes like the blanket statement. So anytime my boss had a hard conversation with me, he showed up with EAP program stuff.
Mm. So a hard conversation meaning something about your work performance
Yeah.
or
Yeah, like, you know what, this didn't go very well. We have to let's have this conversation about that. I don't think you're performing up to the way you were. And I was in the middle of kind of resetting expectations for myself. I was in the middle of resetting expectations of what I was going to put into my work because I took it home with me and I took it very, very seriously. And there was all of this internal stuff going on that I didn't know how to have a conversation about, nor did my boss.
mm,
And so I was always approached with, uh, like, here's your piece of paper, get some help if you need some. This is
mm,
the things that we provide you with, alongside of the conversation, which beforehand never happened.
very interesting.
Right. So like that felt really demeaning to me. Like, why is it that you think that this conversation is going to cause me to do anything without having an actual real conversation with me anymore? Right.
Yeah,
This is where I'm saying, like, I become the enigma in the management group.
yeah. Now, what happened for you when you would go to these company events?
Um, I didn't. That's pretty much what ended up happening. I didn't really get invited to company events anymore. That's what happened. We would go out, except for, I guess I'm off a little bit because I did go to the golf tournament. Golf tournament, I was like 4 months sober. That I was terrified of it. I was wondering what everyone was going to think. Beer flows all over the place in that. I made sure that I was with somebody safe that I could be accountable with while I was there. But and I can't expect anybody else to, like, respect my boundaries. They don't really know, but it was just like any other event. It was interesting that nobody cared, first of all, whether I was drinking or not.
Mhm.
But the only like beverages that are basically offered outside of like pop and water are all alcoholic beverages.
Yep. Yep. So you mentioned though that you used to go to like corporate dinners where the booze were flowing or things of that nature. Was that something that you were no longer invited to, or did you go and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, no, I wasn't invited to. What happened there was other people were now sent in my place to go to the event.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't know whether that had to do because I went to all of these other events and I performed great, right? But like I never ended up having these conversations anymore, but it didn't happen for me. That's
That's fascinating.
yes.
Fascinating. So in the remainder of the time that you were with that company, did you ever go to any at all? I remember you talking about a business trip that you went on.
Yep. There was there was business trips that I still went on, and we
Mm-hmm.
still went out to dinner. And when we went out to dinner, I would be ordering my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's still having their drinks and having their time, and it's an experience. So you don't bond over that anymore, right?
Yeah.
So everyone else is bonding over the drinking as opposed to sharing like personal stories or like you still only do that over like sitting at a bar,
Yeah.
those surface conversations, and that's kind of it. It turns into a really kind of weird experience.
So, Steve, wave a magic wand for me
Magic
and
wands.
envision that those experiences where you went and you weren't drinking,
Yep.
how would you want it to be?
One of the first things that that comes to mind, and even when I was there, was it was surprising. And I mean, I partook, you know what I mean? It was something that I did, but I realized that when you don't and you see everyone else get kind of sloppy, you're like, how does this align with our work environment? I'm interrupted by my dog now. I'm sorry about that. How long, like, how does this align with our work values, our work environment, and all of that stuff? And it doesn't. It actually doesn't align with any of the values, because like, we talk about efficiency and we talk about productivity and we talk about all of this stuff, and we're consuming and celebrating the one thing that is going to make us less efficient as humans, right? That's going to slow us down, and it's going to affect our critical thinking. It's going
Mhm.
to there's no added benefit to it. So when you sit there and I mean, that was me too. But when you sit there and you step outside of it and you can see that there is no added benefit, what can you do differently, right? You can celebrate the food. You can celebrate the event. You can celebrate. It doesn't have to show up with alcohol. What if we
Mhm.
thought about, like, just the well-being of our employees, which we do and we say we care about? If we had events that didn't involve alcohol and somebody complained about it, that would have been me, and that was the person who had a problem,
Yeah.
right? Like retirement parties, here's 2 or 3 drink tickets. All of that stuff, all of the stuff that I attended that I no longer drank with, and I'm sitting at the table with my water, which was no problem. I'm not even complaining about that. It's just
Yeah.
you can see so much that it's the culture where we can celebrate the people without it.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the reality that we're not here to change the world,
Yes.
that there are going to be people out there who that is still going to be how they navigate these professional events. But I still want to be included and I still want to be, at the table and I still want to be in the conversations because that's how our, careers are moved forward.
Hmm.
So what advice do you have for people who, like you, find themselves at those tables where everybody else is drinking, but you still want to be included? How do you navigate that today?
Today I show up prepared. If I was to go somewhere, it might even be in my vehicle, or I might look at the menu or show up and I can still be involved and be a part of it. Um, I show up prepared in a couple of ways. I would show up prepared, like if I'm gonna make connections with people, I'm gonna make them early and often,
Mhm.
not late.
Yes.
Uh, I'm going to put more importance on earlier in the evening, earlier in the event. I'm going to show up and I'm going to either bring my own drinks. If we're at a restaurant or whatever it is, they'll have something there
Yeah.
for me now. It's such a better environment. This is like, and we're talking 3 years later. It's
Mhm.
the change in the non-alcoholic beverage or mocktails.
So
Mocktail
much
th
better.
mocktail 3 years ago was not a term that was regularly used. It is now. It's not. It's something bartenders are familiar with. So I mean, it's come a long way now as it is, and even with non-alcoholic options. And for me, early on, I didn't even touch a non-alcoholic option. I
Mhm.
would just stay separate from it. But I think, like, the main thing is early and often,
I love
and
that.
catch those people. And I mean, if they're drinking, 1 or 2 is not a big deal, but I'm not going to connect with anyone. You weren't going to connect with me over anything important after the third beer or the fourth
Right.
beer.
Right.
We were going to connect over.
The dumb stuff we were doing.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Uh, come prepared. I always looked at the menu, so I didn't feel like I was gonna feel awkward or know what to ask or know what to drink, especially early on when I didn't have the confidence I do now in these sort of situations.
Yeah.
Uh, because that plays big on your mindset, especially early on, right?
One of
And
the interesting things that I've noticed since we've been doing this is that I'm running across a lot of people who love to have that first drink
hmm
and just don't know that there's other options for the second, third, and fourth drinks. So today, when I'm going to those group dinners, because I have the confidence in myself now, I didn't early on.
yeah.
I'll say, when they're coming around to ask for drinks, I'll say loudly so others can hear, like, what do you have that's non-alcoholic?
Oh.
And what I've noticed
hmm
is, I get my little drink with the nice foo-foo things in it, and people are like, oh, what's that?
Right.
And they'll order that as their second drink.
I'll just be the example.
Be the example.
hmm
And it's fascinating to watch how people react to that now,
Oh, and especially because you're sober, so you actually get to people watch and you get to experience their
right?
experience with them.
Exactly. Man,
Yep.
I didn't do that before. I was people mimicking, but not people watching.
Yes. Yes. Oh man, do I ever relate to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Steve, one of the most heartbreaking parts of the story for me is the fact that your company was so just ill prepared, not out of malice, but just ill prepared to deal with you in this really vulnerable moment. I mean, not everybody's that brave. So, even as a boss or as a supervisor, one of the things that we're responsible for is getting people together and doing team building types of things. So what would you want today to see that would be more sober inclusive to allow for the people who want to drink to still drink, but to be more inclusive of those like you who were showing up as a team bonding or after hours gathering?
I think it's just a simple question, it's a quick conversation. Hey, what do you think would be great for you or the people that would like non-alcoholic options? Or what kind of things would you like? What That's one of the things that never happened was like how can I serve you?
Hmm.
Right? And as a boss, when I was a boss, that was one of the things that I asked the people that were doing work for me was how can I serve you?
Hmm.
Right? And that was in the work environment, but it still goes to whenever you're going out into the world and connecting with suppliers and connecting with potential even new suppliers or corporate or whatever that may be. There's the inclusivity part is including you in the conversation.
Hmm.
And I think,
It's fascinating. We often liken this to dietary restrictions now.
right.
If people want vegetarian or vegan or gluten free, it's now a thoughtful gesture to ask in
hmm
advance if anybody has these dietary restrictions so that we can accommodate those at
hmm
whatever restaurant we go to or whatever. Why isn't it the same?
Right. And like workplaces, they want to do that. They
Yeah.
want to, if Diane has a dietary restriction and Joe he's celiac and he can't have gluten, they're gonna have a meal catered for that, and they're gonna have, so and so has diabetes, so we're gonna have to make a special meal for that, and we cater to all of those things. But because alcohol has this different culture around it, it's not one of those things. I mean, it's changing now, but I think being included in the conversations, all of those people that had the dietary restrictions were included in the conversation,
Yep.
right? And I mean, I was very upfront. And if you were to ask me if I would do that again, I would really have to sit down and ponder whether I would have shared that with my work or not.
Mm.
And I think
It's such a
sharing it,
shame.
yeah, I think sharing it with my work was, I mean, it's part of my journey. It's helped me grow. But if I look back on it, it's not a thing that I would like to experience again.
Mm. Well, what that says to me is that anybody listening, because we have people who are part of HR, we have people who are part of, professional world, is to be the change that we want for
Yeah.
people like you. It's so that people like you don't end up saying, I never want to go through that again. And so to me, authentic conversations
Hmm.
start with being vulnerable on both sides. And you were very vulnerable in that moment. And I love the question that you said, like, how can we best support you? Is
Yeah,
all they had to say.
and on the flip side of that, like earlier on in my sobriety, I never had the confidence to go up and be like, "Hey, it would be really cool if we had some different drink options here." Right?
Right.
Like I didn't have the confidence or the courage to do that, right? And nowadays, I think I would. It would be a
Yeah.
thought that would cross my mind. It would be a conversation that I'd be willing to go and have.
Yep.
But people that are early on, a lot of us haven't found our voice yet.
Yep.
And especially when we tell you that, listen, we have a problem, we're looking for that support. We're looking for somebody to like notice us a little bit and be like, hey,
Yeah.
cool, this might be really good for them. And you're going to get way more out of us. You just
Yep.
are. Uh, and I think that would have happened with me too. Like a little bit of notice, a little bit of how's it going, a little bit of that, and you're going to get, you would have got a lot more out of me. And I know that may be not how it's supposed to work, but
Yep.
uh, feeling included in the workplace makes you feel less excluded in the workplace.
Hmm. I have to give a shout out to I was at a business retreat about a year ago,
Hmm.
and the organizer knew I was sober because of Sober Life Rocks, and
Yeah.
reached out to me and said, hey, in the evenings we have paid for a bartender to come to the facility and give us, all the drinks. What would you like to have?
Oh, that's amazing.
And he even went so far as to say, let me give you my credit card and order some stuff to be shipped to the location so that you have exactly what you and other people would want. I mean, that is like above and beyond, but that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
mean, in the workplace, anyways, when you go above and beyond, you're appreciated for it.
right. And I'm still talking about it a year later.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
much more loyal would an employee be if a boss were to do something like that and be that kind of thoughtful?
Yeah. And I mean, really, in the end, if you look at the health benefits of drinking,
Mhm.
there's really no point in having it there anyway.
Well, yes. I mean, it baffles my mind that HR is okay with companies paying for people to get drunk and then let them drive home. I mean, some companies now will pay for Ubers and whatnot, but just the whole
Hmm.
culture, it baffles my mind. One other interesting thing I just want to drop is that here in the US, um, recovery from addiction is now a covered um, classification of disability protection.
Hmm.
So if you go to a boss and say, I'm in recovery and I'm going to need these accommodations if you send me on this business trip, for instance, if you are the sort of person who goes regularly to a recovery meeting,
Hmm.
the boss by law has to make accommodations for you to be able to do that.
Hmm.
So that's a big step forward. But I also think that for the individual in the company, that can feel like a big lift to be able to even say those things.
Yeah. And so to clarify a little bit, I did this, I was in Canada.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why I came out the way I did, because we already had like laws in place where if I said to my work that I had a problem, right, rather than hiding it, I had a greater benefit. I also had a lot of accountability, but I had a benefit to doing that, right?
Protections and stuff. Yeah.
And I know that's here in the States now, because there were times where I was working late and that sort of thing. I would tell my boss, like, I'm not going to be available between 7 and 8 o'clock. If somebody needs to call me, I will. I'll do that. I'll be in my office between 7 and 8 o'clock because I'm going to go to a recovery meeting. And I did that
Yeah.
while on company time, but I was still available to working. So I mean,
Nice.
there was a couple accommodations there. If I asked for it, it was
That's
rare, but if I asked for it, I did it. I
that's
cause
fantastic.
yes.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Steve, I'd love for you to tell me just a little bit about your Through the Glass Door Recovery podcast.
Okay, so it's Through the Glass Recovery podcast. I'm the co-host of it. It's We're alcohol focused recovery podcast, and we do a podcast that's a little bit differently. It's not just two people, it's myself and Julie. She's the other co-host. And what we do is we invite 2 to 3 people to join us in having a conversation about a topic related to recovery. So anxiety, loneliness, boredom, uh, do you have a spouse that drinks, but you're trying to stay sober? And like, we're on episode 127, 128 now. And
Congratulations.
you can go through a whole list of topics, because what we wanted to do was use our form of recovery and give that to everyone else and give those conversations to everyone else, because having that conversation about that thing that hurts, like we just released an episode called Dealing with Emotions,
Mm,
and it's a phenomenal episode. I think it's like my top 5 of all of the ones we've recorded so far. It's a great episode. And a lot
nice.
of the times we don't speak about alcohol, right? It comes up. We talk recovery, but it's more or less people sharing life and sharing their experiences and how they deal with and cope with and what happened in their stories surrounding that topic, which
Fantastic.
really narrows down the focus to the conversation. And our hope there is that it just makes it that much more relatable.
I love that so much. So I just want to thank you for joining me today and all of you listening. Having you be part of the journey, it means a lot. Um, Steve's perspective reminds us that it's important what we say and how we do, both by making our own intentional choices around alcohol, but also if we are in a position where we can make it more inclusive for other people. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And don't forget, check out Steve's podcast, Through the Glass Recovery, for more powerful discussions. So I just want to remind you, Sober Life Rocks also has the largest group on LinkedIn for sober professionals, and we'd love for you to join us. It's the Sober Life Rocks community. And that's where you can find support and share stories, connect with like-minded people navigating this whole journey. Until next time, think about what you can do to create more sober, inclusive workplace gatherings for people who choose not to drink. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Margie. It was a pleasure sitting down and having this conversation.